In this episode, we talk to someone who has experience of working in theoretical physicist. He's a theoretical physicist by profession, and also a person who has dangled with machine learning and AI and large-scale computing, data science, and also he has a lot of interest in aviations and art. And a very big welcome to you, Andrea.
Then I went actually into the military for a couple of years to become a paratrooper. So I was still, because I could do aviation stuff there, parachuting. That was really, really cool. Did it for a couple of years. And only when I dropped out of the military a few years after, I started my academic career. I was always very interested in math, but I also liked philosophy. I liked physics in general, of course. I liked literature and many other things. Because if you go into theoretical physics and you do your master's degree, you cannot stop there, because there you just have started scratching the surface, and you have to do a PhD, from my point of view, to really understand, at least get an idea of what's going on. People called me a nerd.
Like, how can somebody not just be curious?
There's so much to learn, and yeah, it's takes more than a lifetime. I'm a theoretical physicist focusing on quantum field theory, which is a mathematical description of how elementary particles work.
I'll tell you, I am really smitten by your aviation, your passion for aviation.
It's still fascinating that a heavier than air vehicle can take off and fly around. It's crazy, really. Machine learning techniques are, in a sense, very simple. The idea is really very often just simple.
Being a father, having a family, and then being on a full-time science, how do you manage everything?
Discussion is one of the most crucial things, and if you find like-minded people, then it's very easy to get into these things.
What is it happening in the Europe startup ecosystem right now? Welcome to another episode of Pod Chat. In this episode, we talk to someone who has experience of working in theoretical physicist. He's a theoretical physicist by profession, and also a person who has dangled with machine learning and AI and large-scale computing, data science, and also he has a lot of interest in aviations and art and various other things. A very big welcome to you, Andrea. And I would like to introduce you. Andrea is currently a professor at University of Graz in Austria, and he's also he has his own team there, and he works on data science, as well as he is also a person who works on integration of industry and academia. Welcome, Andrea. I'm so happy to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Just one small correction, not a full professor, but I'm just running a team for a research facility that is owned by the university, but very close to academia. But it's correct.
Yeah. So, Andrea, let me ask you this question that I have read about you, that you had a very a science childhood. Like, your father was into science and computers. Was it a natural thing to be in science for you, or to fall in love for physics? And how did you unravel this whole journey unraveled for you?
That is a very cool question. Thank you for asking that. So actually, it turned out that I didn't quite directly go into science, but I always liked math and computers from a very early age on. So I was drawn towards it, I would say. But since I also, as you mentioned, I liked aviation a lot, I kind of initially tried to kind of go more into this direction, started taking flying lessons, which was very expensive back then here in Austria. And then eventually I stopped because it became really exceedingly expensive to fund these kind of endeavors. And then I went actually into the military for a couple of years to become a paratrooper. So I was still, because I could do aviation stuff there, parachuting. That was really, really cool. Did it for a couple of years. And only when I dropped out of the military a few years after, I started my academic career. And then I don't know how, but I felt somehow that theoretical physics would be the field for me to go in, because I was always very interested in math, but I also liked philosophy. I liked physics in general, of course. I liked literature and many other things. And I was considering each of those individual fields, but then I thought that theoretical physics covers most of kind of those fields, in the sense that you have a philosophical angle. For example, if you think of the interpretation of quantum mechanics, that is kind of transitioning slowly also into philosophy at some point, because this is not very tangible. Then also math, of course. Math plays a very, very crucial, substantial role in theoretical physics, and it's beautiful. So you learn a lot of math. there as well. And physics as a whole is fascinating in itself. So then I chose to go into this direction, and I never regretted it. It's a beautiful thing to study, and I can only recommend it to anybody who's interested in doing anything like that.
So technically, you did not have a very linear fashion. Like after high school, you did not immediately go to a bachelor degree or an academic undergraduate. So I think that gave you a lot of exposure. You knew what it was in the world, being in the military, being in the aviation. So you learned a lot. So when you immediately went for your undergrad, and then was it a natural plan that let's do a PhD?
Yes, that was weird how this came about, because like after doing, so first I focused on a kind of, so here in Austria we have these kind of schools which are somewhere between a high school and a college, I would say, and they give you a professional degree. So they're more in depth, but they don't give you, so it's roughly, I think one could think of it as being roughly equivalent to a bachelor's degree. I focused on computer science there, which I also really love. It's beautiful. And from then on out, I sort of decided that I would like to go now more into this theoretical physics thing. And then it just came natural, because if you go into theoretical physics and you do your master's degree, you cannot stop there, because there you just have started scratching the surface. And you have to do a PhD, from my point of view, to really understand, at least get an idea of what's going on. And this is still going on. So it's been quite a while since I got my PhD now, but I'm still learning. I'm revisiting a lot of things that I learned back then, because they only start to make sense after you're exposed to this thing for quite some time, because it's so complicated and you sort of have to piece this puzzle together, sort of, and that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of thinking and reflection. You have to read a lot, you have to let it sink, you have to play with it, you have to leave it be, you have to pick it up again, and eventually it starts making more and more sense. And now I'm really starting reading pretty much the whole curriculum again that I was exposed to, and it makes much more sense now. And it's a process, I think, that takes a long time, so you can never stop really learning.
So, Andrea, I would say that you were pretty much a nerd as a kid who would sit back and do computing programs and study physics and maths. Was it like that, your childhood?
Yeah, I've heard a couple of times like that, or people called me a nerd, but I wouldn't say that this is in general true. So it's true. I'm drawn to puzzles. I love these kind of things, and it certainly helps. But I think what really should matter, and I don't know whether this is really a nerdy feature, but if you think about it and you take a step back and you look at, like, nature or the universe or something like that, and you think about it, then you don't really have to be a nerd, but you should be curious about how is it that it is like that, or how can it be that the next star closest to our star, the sun, is like more than 4 light years away. How can these things, I mean, that is just, I think that's beyond just, being part of a specific trait of a character, like being a nerd or something. I think this is really, I cannot imagine that this is not interesting to anybody, really. Everybody should be interested in that sort of thing. And I'm sure.
Yeah. Like, how can somebody not just be curious?
Exactly. So I think if you really think about these things and take a quiet moment for yourself and you think about it, then pretty much everybody would appreciate these things. And it's so amazing what we can learn today. And I'm so happy that we live in these times now, despite the times also being troubled in many ways. But we can learn so much, and all this knowledge is readily accessible for everybody. So like 100 years back or so, things were very different, both in the availability of knowledge and also what we knew, actually. But in the past 100 of years, this really exploded, and there's so much to learn. And it takes more than a lifetime to kind of to learn it. So we're very privileged in that sense.
Andrea, you went for your PhD. I think you stayed back in Austria for your PhD, right?
I did 1 year or so roughly in the US, and 2 years here, so 3 years I spent on my PhD. Mm-hmm.
So it's a collab program between India and I think so, University of Louis in Washington, right?
Washington University in St. Louis, exactly.
Yes,
That's where I went.
So there was. So can you tell us something? Can you make it very simple for layman to about the work you've done for
Absolutely.
a PhD?
Yes. I'm a theoretical physicist focusing on quantum field theory, which is a mathematical description of how elementary particles work, what their dynamics is, and how they can be assembled. So how we can understand really the world on the most fundamental level. And we believe, according to our current theories, that there are only 4 forces in nature that act upon those particles. And those are gravity, electromagnetism, the weak interaction, and the so-called strong interaction, where gravity and electromagnetism is known to everybody because gravity pulls us down, and electromagnetism is responsible for everything that is associated with light. So things that we see, those are all processes that run according to the electromagnetic force. And the weak one is kind of, you can think of it as being associated with radioactive decay and processes like that. And then there's the strong force. And from my point of view, apart from gravity, that's the most interesting one. It's a very kind of intense force that is responsible for lumping elementary particles together to form nuclei. And it is very rich in its mathematical structure also, so that the mathematical theories that we have in place are very complicated and very beautiful as well. And I did my PhD in this area, so looking at particular mathematical objects that describe certain properties of such particles. And by studying the mathematical formulation in detail, you can learn something about the particles, given, of course, that the assumptions of our theories are correct. And I'm still doing these kind of things. So I'm looking at a particular property of those particles, namely, like we call it analytic properties in math. So I'm looking at those objects and look for signatures of certain properties in these mathematical objects that tell me something about the particles. So that is one thing that I did, a big thing, and I'm still active in that area. And the other big thing, I'm also still collaborating with my mentor in the US on this one, and with a good friend who I met there, who now also lives in India. So we're working on matter under extreme conditions. So you can squeeze matter together, like to form super dense structures. And if you, like in nature, for example, you could think of such densities occurring at the core of a neutron star, for example.
I will just interrupt you in between. I think this is the thing that works on the solid state hard drives, right?
Which one for the solid state hard drives?
Where you use huge amount of energy to put the forces and energy together to put the information.
Way beyond that. So I'm really talking about matter where regular matter as we know it here ceases to exist, and nobody really knows what's going on. We have mathematical theories about that, but so like matter so dense as you would see like in the core region of a neutron star. So that is pretty much the densest stuff that you can have apart from a black hole maybe. And within that structure, weird phenomena arise and emerge, and those we study. So they're called color superconductivity is one of those phenomena that we're studying. And we're doing numerical computer simulations on these things, and we found very interesting processes there that are not really understood. And so it's all about matter under extreme conditions as possibly can be found in the cores of neutron stars. So that is another big aspect of the physics stuff that I'm doing.
Andreas, this was your PhD and you did it in thing. And then it was a natural course to move to postdoc for a person who is this academic bent of mind. So you moved into the US for your postdoc. So how was the experience of working there, and how was it different? Maybe for European, I think so US is a little difficult. But since you had already the experience of working in your PhD in a collaboration, it might have helped you. So can you kindly tell us how it was with your postdoc work and the entire journey in US?
Absolutely. So that was like, so when I finished up my PhD, I had an offer for a postdoc position at the math department at Humboldt University in Berlin, which was very interesting also because this came about because I was very interested in low-dimensional topology and knot theory. Like the mathematical theory of how you can tie and untie knots and disentangle these things. This is very, very interesting. And I read a book and about this that was written by a physics and math professor who lives there. And I was absolutely fascinated by it. And then this friend who I'm collaborating with in India, he said, "Why don't you write him an email and tell him that you like the book?" So I did that, and he invited me over then for a couple of days. I went there, I gave a talk and everything, and he ended up then offering me a postdoc position where I could have deepen these things that I already liked very much there. And at the same time, I got this offer from the US. And then I had to make this choice. Do I take the position in the US or do I go for the math department in Berlin? And then I really thought, okay, I've been living in Europe for pretty much all of my life. So I think, it's more of a change of scenery to go to the US. And then I decided going there, and I don't regret it. It was a great time. And I must really say the time as a postdoc was the best time I had in my life, together with being a PhD student, because you don't have many responsibilities, really. My mentor there, he is an absolutely amazing person. He's brilliant. He's very smart. He's extremely kind. And he pretty much let me do whatever I wanted to do. He supported me in the process. He was really great when you wanted to discuss things, and being a very capable thinker, he could also really dissect your thoughts and help you in the process. So this was really amazing. And it was, I think, the best time in my whole career that I had there. And if you have the chance to do a postdoc and don't really just want to jump on something to earn a lot of money, there is really the big thing, and that's the biggest selling point, I think, for doing a postdoc in such an environment, that you can really pursue what you love. And if you have a mentor like I had, Mark Alford, he's at the physics department of Washington University in St. Louis, and it was amazing. It was really, really great.
So after you finished your postdoc, I want to ask this question specifically. Did you know that I will be getting offers? Like, I had enough papers, or I have enough citations, conferences. How do you know this is what I'm ready for academic world, or this is end of academic world and I need to look into industry? I mean, nowadays there's a lot of physics-based demand in the industry too. So how did you know how to switch, or is it there? I'm there at the market. I can be in academia and I can look for professorship roles.
Mm-hmm. This thing, physics, is a very general education, and it allows you to break into many different fields. So if I look at what my colleagues are doing, they're working from finance to insurance to kind of really all sorts of science and technology, of course, engineering. So it's very broad, and you have a skill set that allows you to break into many different fields. But leaving academia, I mean, the thing is, it's very, very tough to get a full professorship in theoretical physics, let's face it. And there are brilliant people out there. I've met many in the course of my own kind of career, and I saw many of them, and most of them being much better than I ever was. And all of them kind of failed getting a permanent position, or it took them like a decade and more. So it's really because there are so few positions, and because this is one of the most fundamental research that is around. So it's chronically underfunded, and it's really, really hard getting a position. I think it's easier in the US still than it is here in Europe, but it is incredibly tough. It doesn't pay very well. You have to move around a lot. So on average, I would say every 3 years. If you have a family, it's very hard to make a living from what you earn. So it's extremely competitive. So you're working all the time pretty much. Even though this never bothered me, I was also working like 24/7 pretty much, but I love what I do. So I never considered it as being work. I just love doing that. But you have to sort of have this dedication also. Otherwise, you won't stand a chance. And so it's extremely tough, and it makes sense, I think, at some point to realize that there is just a very slim chance that you can really make a full professorship at some point. So if you want to have a family, and I have 2 kids and everything, and a wife, so at some point I really, I got this offer and I took it. Even though I must say I regret it a little bit, because it is a different world. So even though I'm still working in research, but and somehow in between research and industry, it is very different from this academic freedom and the academic spirit, even though it is an academic institution I'm working for, but it is different, like as compared to what I'm used to from this really, low level academia, low level in the sense that it's very fundamental. And I miss it really a lot, I must say.
Andrea, I want to tell you, it's everybody's journey. I've seen, and the best thing about physics is that you have so much of transferable skills that the market is holding on to, and the world, your main skill is data, science, computation, and the whole world is now sitting on top of that. Be it the whole computer, the big companies, everybody, they all want people who are with numbers, maths, computers, physics.
Yes.
So I think it's pretty easy to bifurcate from a physics training person. And it is more easy by the training, by the virtue of their mental capacity, they easily go. But I also feel that it is very difficult. I was that day talking to my husband that it's so difficult to do a postdoc and then do completely different thing. It must be feeling so painful, for a person that I've spent my entire 30s sitting in a lab and pipetting, and now I cannot do. So it's a very painful thought to even go and just change.
Yes.
So Andrea, I want to ask you, so this change, and you were ready to move from US to Austria back, or for your family or whatever reasons, or it was mostly professional?
It was my family. So when I was there in the US, I started at some point, there was this breakthrough in AI research. I think it was 2016, 2017, when AlphaZero came around to play the world champion at Go, and it won. So then this steered a lot of movements, kind of like our students, for example, started forming reading groups by themselves and breaking into AI, learning these kind of traits. And I did the same thing back then. I started learning about how does a neural network work and these kind of things. And that kind of opened up various opportunities because the industry sort of hopped onto that. They saw it on my LinkedIn profile, and they kept bombarding me with kind of invites for job interviews, and I did a few. And this really showed me that there's a huge interest in the industry, and apparently also a lack of educated people who can do these sort of things. So I started educating myself alongside my physics studies, and also tried to bring these two worlds, AI and machine learning and theoretical physics, together. And I then really wanted to stay in the US, but my wife wanted to come back to Europe. So we finally decided that we should come back. We came back, and that's where I am right now. But it's a good place. I like it here, and I'm still active, kind of in academia. I'm still active in AI research, so it's all good. But it is not this kind of the thing I initially hoped for when my career was really on the rise. But yeah, that's how things.
Andrea, there's a running joke when we go to our PhD, when we are in undergrad, we say we want to win a Nobel Prize. By the end of the postdoc and PhD, we're let's just live a life.
Yeah.
So I understand that.
Well, I never went that high, but I still had.
But I would also say this: you say staying in this two country, being born in Austria and worked in US, you see a different culture. I mean, I personally see the difference. US is it's a complete excellence. It's a culture of excellence. People are striving every day. The competition is right here. No, It's okay to work. It's completely fine. And weekends and 24/7 labs are working, functioning. People they don't care. There's no what is holiday? Holiday is a far off concept. Staying in Europe, and I stay in France, I've seen this. People have this conscious choice of thinking about the quality of life. They have a very balanced life.
Yes,
it's a Friday and they'll say, weekend, and they're going. They have a weekend. They have summers or winters, which is also in one way very sustainable life choice. But I also believe that science cannot function in that way. Science is difficult because in case for practical or experimental biologists like us, we need to go to lab on Sundays because our mouse is waiting there. We have things to feed. So I think that is a kind of a difference in culture. Do you also feel the same about the Europe and the US work culture?
Yes, I would say so. So we have the same thing here as you described for France. There's a lot of focus on work-life balance. It's very easygoing and it's much less intense. There are many public holidays. I think in the US there are five throughout the whole year, and that is it. In Austria, I think we have five in probably the first 2 months of the year or something. So it's really it's very different. I'm not sure, and of course, like if you have to go to the lab, if you have like living creatures there that demand you to be there, that is a different story. As a theorist, of course, I can take it easy there, and I can think like while I'm running or while I'm walking or while I'm at home. Had my best ideas often when I went running in the park, and you can reflect things, so you can always kind of work in a sense and think about the problems you're working on. But then again, you also, I think it is important really that you also take your time off. And I always did it like this when I went to the office and I sat down, I fire up my computer and I start doing calculations or whatever. Sometimes I had this feeling, okay, today I cannot focus, or I'm not really present, or I'm not as present as I normally am. So whenever I had that day, and that maybe happened like once or twice in a month or two or something like that, then I said, okay, it doesn't make any sense now for me to spend time because I feel I'm not there. I cannot focus so well. So call it off and then take your time off. And since I left aviation and got my pilot's license in the US, often that was the time then when I took a plane and I took off and went flying. I leaned back. That was amazing flying, in the afternoon sun, being the only person for miles around in southern Illinois. And that was for me a time where I could get away from things. And yet, in your subconscious mind, I think you're still working on a problem somehow, but you just let it go. And after that, this really recharges your batteries. So it's important also that you have your moments where you take yourself out of this whole rut and really try to get away with your mind. And that's important.
So, Andre, I'll tell you, I am really smitten by your whole aviation, your passion for aviation. Like, I think it's a child thing. Like, you had it since child, right?
Yes, that's my whole life. That's true. I don't know. I love it really. It's so cool.
Tell us something. How did aviation come? Like, I really want to know that.
I really don't. I don't think I can see. What I'm beginning to realize more and more, I'm now 45 years old, and I'm beginning to be more aware of kind of the emotional part that makes up a human being, and that was never so conscious to me really when I was younger. I was kind of more like robotic kind of person, and I just did my thing and was very focused, and really that was all that mattered to me, really just like the conscious mind and reflecting things and thinking about them. But now I increasingly also realize how deep emotional dimensions are that make up a huge portion of a person, and those things cannot be described by rational thoughts. Really, they just are somehow. And I think my love for aviation is one of those things. I don't know, really, it just doesn't make much sense on a rational level, really. I just was drawn to it as a kid because it fascinated me how complicated those airplanes are, how complicated, if you sit down in a cockpit, all those instruments, all those systems that you can control. And I like the complexity, I guess. But other than that, I just don't know what drew me towards it. I love everything about it. I like how airplanes look, how they're painted. I love the fact how the physics works out when you're flying. And even after spending time, a decent amount of time in the pilot seat or as a passenger when I traveled the globe, it's still fascinating that a heavier than air vehicle can take off and fly around. It's crazy, really. And also then, if you fly, I had a few moments where, for example, there was one such moment where I was flying on a late afternoon on a Friday, I believe, in the US, and I was coming back flying along the Missouri River. And on that day, for some reason, which is very rarely the case, the air was very, very smooth around there. So normally it's always wind and gusty and you're being you're all over the place. But that day, it was extremely smooth air. It was like the sun was low over the horizon, it was like this very nice light. the airport was lit, which looks very nice because of all those markings. The interstate is running with all the cars, people going home, and it was so smooth. And I configured the airplane for final approach, and you set the airspeed, and it was coming down as if it was on rails. It was perfectly smooth, and that was just, it was amazing, really. It was really, really cool experiencing this. It was so nice, beautiful.
So, Andrea, you learned aviation when you were like, I think so, in your high school. Like, that's where you started your
Yeah, when I was
basics.
16, I took my first flying lessons when I was 16 years old. Yeah.
And then you found it extremely expensive. I think it's a very, very expensive hobby to have. Like, it's like
That is true. Yeah, that's true. In the US, not so much. Here, it's more expensive. But the
okay.
thing is, it also, because as a postdoc and having a family, there was not that much money left for these kind of things. So I stretched it out when I did my US pilot license, and I really took my time. Like whenever I could fit it into my schedule, and whenever I had enough money to fly another hour or two, I took it. And it's possible. So if you really want to do that, and it's also kind of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit, because at some point there comes this point in the life of a student pilot where you have to fly solo for the first time. And this is also a very interesting experience because, you cannot screw it up no matter what. And I also really like that. So those are things I think that they do something with you, and they make some part of who you are, and you mastered these things, and it's cool. It's really, really cool. So if you have a chance flying an airplane, go ahead, do it. It's awesome.
Andrea, so after this stint, you went to military. You were with the military of the with the Austrian forces of your country.
Yes.
Can you tell us some experience, how it was, and some nice experience?
That was, yes, absolutely. So it's very different from the academic world, let me tell you that. So the people you meet there have a very different mindset, but nevertheless, very interesting people. Some of the friendships I made there, I still have. So we meet up very rarely, but occasionally, maybe every 2 years or so. And it was very, very interesting. We did a lot of sports, which I loved back then also, a lot of exercising. Parachuting was amazing. I remember the first time I jumped out of an airplane, that was also a very intense experience, which I don't want to miss it. But like this experience, it also does something with you. That was also amazing. I also participated in various missions here in the Kosovo crisis as the Kosovo force joined in the summer of 1999. I was there with a very small advance party from the Austrian part that kind of went in first before the regular Austrian troops pulled in 2 months later. I spent almost 10 months there, actually, and I saw a lot of things there as well. So that also is, I think it was an experience. I think also serving there in the military and learning about my own limitations physically and also psychologically, I guess, that allowed me to thrive at science later, because I could push myself, and I learned how to be really put a lot of dedication into something, a lot of effort. I think, and managing my own resources and pushing myself. I think for me it really worked. It really helped, and it was a very interesting time in my life also. Yeah, absolutely.
So it was a short service, or you had a short duration of work there in the infantry?
Overall, it was almost 5 years.
Okay.
So it was, roughly 5 years.
But I think so that gave you a preparation, that gave you the endurance and the mental strength training to go through this rigorous academic things.
Exactly, and also kind of really pushing myself. So really keep going where others maybe stopped. So that gave me an advantage, because initially my career in academia was really taking off very steeply. So I made a lot of progress. I had excellent grades. I met many good people in physics. I had great mentors, and everything worked out and fell into place. And I got kind of a bit spoiled, I must say, because everything just worked out so nicely. And it just kept going. It was amazing, really. And then slowly realizing that nevertheless, it's very hard to get a permanent position. That was a process that is very hard to. So I think I'm still not really comfortable with this thought, but yeah, it's
Yeah,
hard
yeah.
to go.
I understand it can be a little bit painful for some time.
Mm-hmm.
Andreas, I want to know that I've seen you writing Python. You're writing the Python courses for beginners in machine learning or for the
Mm-hmm.
Coursera and translating.
Yes.
So I would like that you guys are trained, so you know computing. But
Mm-hmm.
nowadays, the whole market of data science is so up and has so much of job, be it data science, machine learning,
Yes.
artificial intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
computing. So, as a person who is a newbie and in their 30s, or they want to learn data science, or they want to learn this entire thing of artificial intelligence, what do you think is the best place to start?
Yes, very good question. Actually, you can self-educate like yourself using YouTube videos, for example, or Coursera, which I highly recommend. And there is a course, an introductory course to machine learning by Andrew Ng. His last name is spelled NG. And his course, he is a brilliant teacher. I think he's a Stanford professor and the co-founder or founder of Coursera. And this course is so his way of teaching is such that he can really motivate the intuition behind things, and that is it's really fun watching his videos. They're all on YouTube, but also on Coursera. So and they come in small chunks, so like 5 to 10 minutes or so. So you can easily accommodate them in your daily schedule. And just if you really want to learn it, sit down and seriously, if you seriously want to learn it, sit down, look at those videos and pause them every now and then. That's how I started back in whatever 2017 or so. And take a notebook and scribble all the calculations down, think about them, then unpause, let it run for another minute, pause again, do the next step. That's how I did it. You invest a few weeks and you're up and running. So it's really not that hard or complicated.
But it is also about constantly being in practice. I know a lot of people will say, I've taken a course or a course, but if you don't take it, practice it regularly, it doesn't work. At least for
Absolutely.
me.
Yes, that is true. That is exactly why I said you really have to take this seriously. So you have to sit down. It's not just listening to the content that, of course, you hear it and it makes sense at the moment, but then it's gone. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So you have to root it in your own mind. And this you can only do when you really sit down, hands on, and do these things. So instead, like a 10-minute video normally stretched out to an hour or an hour and a half for me, because I paused and then I really, everything that was written, I calculated, I thought about, I programmed everything. And of course, you have to also, as you said, you have to do these things permanently, because you will lose them eventually. And this so painfully becomes like visible for me. Like I picked up this research project that I'm collaborating with this friend of mine in India with after letting it sit for 3 years or so. And I have written this code back then in Fortran, actually, which is still being used in high performance computing. And I looked at this, and still, even now that we're working on this for a few months already and having weekly meetings and I'm programming, I'm still not fully comfortable with understanding everything that I did back then and why I did it that way. So it's amazing how much you forget, even though you think you know everything, because you still have it in your head somehow, but the details are all gone. And so you have to really put some dedication into this and invest time. But with that, everybody can learn it, and I highly recommend it. There's a huge demand by the market for these kind of things. It's fun to learn, really, because those machine learning techniques are, in a sense, very simple. The idea is really very often just simple. The implementation details are often then more tedious and more involved, but nonetheless, the general thoughts are beautiful, and one should absolutely do that. It's cool.
Yeah, and once you learn the course, I think you should take up small data set and start fiddling with it, just playing around it. That way you go. Otherwise, just doing a course and putting up in LinkedIn doesn't matter. Like you just tick it off the bucket list.
Yes.
It's about being practice. Yeah.
Absolutely, that is true. And also, like, there are Kaggle challenges, for example, like this Kaggle platform where you can there are data sets there that you can just use for educational purposes, where you do exactly what you said. There are tons of tutorials. Every deep learning framework has its own tutorials available, which are amazing. There is kind of Udacity, which is another platform which normally sells it's more expensive, the courses that they sell, but they have a few for free also, like deep learning specialization courses, which are great. So there's tons of material out there, and it's very easy to expose yourself to these things. And if you really want to do it, I think what you really need is exposure for an extended period of time, and then you can pick it up. So yeah, that's
So, Andreas, on the last part, I would like to talk about your work presently, which is a collaboration. It's a beautiful work, technically thinking. You're building, baking, making science, and you're making it to the industry. It's a nice pipeline.
Yes.
So, I would like to ask you, how is the present Europe startup ecosystem, or what is it happening in the Europe startup ecosystem right now?
Yes. Okay, you cannot really, I think, so you have to, so you cannot treat Europe as a whole when it comes to that, because there are distinctions depending on which part of Europe you're in. Austria, we have a pretty thriving ecosystem, but not enough investors, I feel, for these kind of things. So even though I think many, the infrastructure is there, I think there are many incubators and there's a lot of happening, but I think it could be better. In Europe as a whole, I'm not sure, for example, how the Eastern countries, how it looks there, like in Eastern Europe, I'm not so sure. But I guess, for example, Ireland, UK, that's a whole different story again. So overall, it's not so bad, but it is very different, for example, from Asia or China in particular, how these things work. So I think there could be more to be like more government care for these things, but this is pretty much true for all the key areas that I'm active in. I always see that, there's.
So if you have a tangible idea that is tangible in the market, and you want to bring it into the product, so are there enough like support or infrastructure help that helps you get it into the market, and mentorship or like guidance to do that?
I mean, we have these things, but still, I think not enough, really. I mean, all these things are there, really. So there are various. So this incubator, I'm a mentor for. This ESA incubator, this is how it works. So you apply with you pitch your idea. If you're picked, you get an office space. You get two mentors at least, one from the academic side, that could be me, and one from the business side, which is normally some marketing professional or something like this. And then you meet up at least quarterly. And the program runs for, I think, 11 months or so.
Okay.
And they're really brought up to speed. And in the past, I did have very, very good experience with a startup that I worked with, where I invested more time because they had a great idea. I helped them also write a research proposal, and they got funding for it. So that was a very successful story. And they also really benefited from the marketing mentor they had. So I also participated in these meetings because I was interested in how they're doing. And in the beginning, it was an interesting process because they weren't very organized, and they didn't have the roles kind of distributed among the team. And there was a lot of back and forth, and it wasn't really good what they did. But after this, they were really, very streamlined and well aligned with their core idea. They had customers really and high potential technicians, and it was really, really great. And now they have their own office space. They have customers, I think, also in other countries by now. So they really took off, and it's amazing seeing how well these things sometimes work. So I think these programs make totally sense. But overall, I think it's too small. You would need more of these things.
Okay.
Do
you think so, Andreas? Do you think that AI is the future of the science, and we are looking for it very, very soon? Is this AI thing going to replace humans, and it's going to be that is the future we are looking for?
I don't think so. I don't really like calling it AI. Also, I'd rather go with machine learning because it is. It is not. There's not that much intelligence in it normally. Except maybe of course, we try to build whatever machines or something which are capable of thinking, if you wish, or which make their own decisions towards something more general AI, if you wish. But we are not nearly there, and I don't think that these things are really within reach for us. Like really, what anything that we would consider as being intelligent. What we have is a very elaborate set of optimization techniques that allow us to tackle certain problems, recognize patterns, and or act in a smart way to solve a particular problem in an environment, as long as the environment is not too big or too complicated, or as long as the task is not too general. And I mean, definitely there's interesting stuff ahead. There was a lot of ground that we covered in the past years, and I would love to see where this is all going. And I do think that we are at the point also where it is important that you consider society as a whole and the impact of this technology on society, because you can use it for all sorts of things. People have to understand how these things work. If they interact with whatever computer systems, what part of machine learning are being used there, what are the implications? So this is becoming increasingly important. There are also ethical considerations you have to take into account. So I recently joined an advisory board of a startup who are focusing on exactly that, ethical AI. That is very important, I think, in particular for Europe, and to position Europe in the AI landscape on a geopolitical kind of map, I would say. But I don't think that these things will take over, but we should find clever use cases where we can use it really for our benefit, because there's a downside to this, and the downside is that a lot of energy is going to waste when you train these systems, and so it also has this kind of aspect to it. So we should kind of also at some point look into this and not waste too much energy on training stuff that is not really meaningful.
Andreas, with the present scenario, with this kind of booming technology, I've also seen that there's a lot of interdisciplinary science happening.
Mm-hmm.
A lot. I especially see biological science has become like more into looking into the stochastic data, looking into the cells, and we have gone really minute. We are going for a single cell sequencing, like literally we know down in the gene what's happening, and that is the most phenomenal. I think I'm at the best time of science happening right now. I mean, I want to see a mutation, I can see it right now, and I can see what is happening. So do you think that there is a lot of scope of collaboration by taking a technology and using it for chemist, biology, maths, physics?
Yes. So this kind of domain agnostic aspect of these things, that is one of the coolest things, and that is what I like most about my current job, where I'm working with my team, because we're doing exactly that. So like this year, I won 2 research proposals which are focused on using AI for green technology. And one of them, for example, is focusing on modeling the individual growth of trees in a forest when you take into account tons of parameters, like how is the soil, the chemical composition of the soil, how the humidity, the temperature, the climate, which trees are nearby, what root systems do they have, and all these kind of things, and real life data, laser scans. So a lot of information to model how the growth of an individual tree will be in such a setup, for example. But then again, also we're doing another project I did with a very talented student, and she looked into time series analysis for interplanetary coronal mass ejections from the sun, where particle showers hit the planet. And she took data from a spacecraft and analyzed those data series using similar techniques. And then again, we can write, I don't know, an AI-based chatbot for a real estate company. So very, very broad. And that is what I like. You meet people from very different fields, and you learn a lot about like this tree example, for example. So like 2 weeks back, we went into this forest where they have a research facility, those forestry people, and they have like all tons of sensors, and they explained us how they measure that and whatnot. So it's very interesting because you learn about a lot of different things. And this is nice because you can deploy this technology across all those different things using, in essence, the same approaches. So I think, that is definitely cool.
Yesterday, I heard a really nice science story. So there are 3 people in the story. One person is a person who's a biologist. So he tells that I went to Chernobyl and I see that a lot of these animals are mutated and they look really weird. And when he said this proposal to a scientist, to a group of panel for funding, they said, you are just biased. You were just stoned or something like this. This doesn't happen. Now, there is another computational biologist or a theoretical biologist, or let's talk a theoretician in training, who says that I want to make a computer program where with a click of finger, you can mutate anything and you can immediately visualize it. So if I want to mutate your hand, and how would it look like a halter of a beetle or something like this? And there was also another science artist who used to do science art, and she used to make different various different varieties of mutations just because she wants to mix match things.
Yes.
And science is so beautiful that all the three somehow happen to come together, and now they're working towards making something. Like, we can see the mutations, like we can just imagine, like, you change this, let's see how it works. And that's the brilliance of, I think, technology of this AI and computation and large scale massive computation is bringing to science. I think it's the most beautiful thing happening right now.
Absolutely. I also love that you mentioned this art angle, because I think this is also art. I love art. I also visualize some of my computations, which was initially I did this as a PhD student because I was calculating like in the complex domain, how functions look like there. And I was in my mind, I was spending a lot of time in these landscapes because you can visualize them in 2 dimensions, and in the 3rd dimension, this landscape arises. And I was thinking about it so much, and at some point I thought I would like to see how it actually looks like. And then I started creating images of the actual calculations of those landscapes. And I made movies, like animated computer movies, and I could really see what's going on inside those mathematical objects. And I even, like in St. Louis, I had then there was like an art kind of science and art competition sort of. So I had a few entries there that was really cool. So this is something I really like. And also I think art could be kind of a vehicle to convey thoughts from the sciences for the public. So this is really great.
I'm also interested, and I make sometimes the science comics because I think people don't really like to read this big paper with monotonous data. They are so boring. So you make it an easy comics and you easily grab it. So I really. So yesterday the mathematics fields award got.
I read about it today, this morning, actually, just before meeting with you. I read about this,
yes. And I really liked that. I'm really interested in these maths guys. I have always felt that they're prodigies because I'm not a maths person. So I first thought about. I remember a guy telling me, "You read this book." Like, it was late in my research life. They say you're bad. You tell you're bad in maths. Take this book by Terence Terry on complex number. And I think that's the most brilliant thing a person can read for simple things. And I've also read about Terence, that how he's a prodigy, like literally in 20, he had a PhD. And now we have another prodigy on Maynard. And the guy who has got the Fields Award, he was a high school dropout and he's into poetry. I think so. Maths and science it's also a form of art.
It absolutely is. And in particular, when it comes to math, I would really love to see more people kind of appreciating its beauty. And I think that the thing is that people so there is kind of like an obstacle you have to overcome to kind of get into it. And this can be flattened or taken out by a person who knows about math and who can provide the right hooks or the right kind of viewpoints for people who don't know about it, to show them how beautiful it really is. It's absolutely amazing. And I would really love to see more people kind of appreciating that. I try to kind of educate my kids, or not educate them in the sense that sit down and let's do this calculation, but I'm trying to really show them some, like, things where math is really at the works, or where you can work out a problem using math, and show them how beautiful it is. I do hope that they will appreciate it at some point. But I think, it's very, very true.
Having a scientist father really helps.
Yes, that is true.
Andrea, on the very last question I'd ask you, just the second last probably, being a father, having a family, and then being on a full-time science, how do you manage everything, professional and personal life?
Yeah, that is definitely hard. My wife's also working, and so my kids are in school all day. I normally pick them up in the afternoon, late afternoon, and then we hang out together or do stuff, but there's not as much time as I wish I had with them. But it's amazing having kids. So regardless of whatever your scientific contribution is as a scientist in life, and even if you get the Fields Medal or the Nobel Prize, nothing comes even close, I'm sure, to having kids, which is the most awesome thing there is, because you see them grow up, you can interact with them more and more as they grow older, and they come up with questions you never thought about, and it's really amazing how a young mind who is just like 7 or 9 years old can like spark ideas in your own head because you never thought about this particular angle they provided to you. So it's really, really amazing. Even though, yeah, I wish there was more time I could spend with them. But
I think so. Having a family in this whole big world that is your own and getting to come back to them after whole days of work is probably the best kind of happiness.
Yes, that sums it up very nicely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Andreas, on the last question. So to people who are moving into this whole thing of AI or artificial interest or machine learning, as you want to call it, or it is the machine learning, what are the kind of advices do you want to give it to people?
So so first, if you really want to break into this field, I would say, as we said earlier, it's a good starting point to kind of learn about it. You don't really have to kind of get fully into it, but to get an idea what it is about. And for this, you can just lean back and watch Andrew Ng's or Coursera course stuff, not with the goal of learning it, but kind of with the goal more to just get an idea of what it is about, really. And the second thing is, and that is important, most important in science and in society as a whole, talk with other people who are in the field. You can also find me on LinkedIn, ping me there. I will get back to you and discuss. So discussion is one of the most crucial things. And if you find like-minded people, then it's very easy to get into these things. And for me, it was always like that. Whatever I did in my life, apart from the flying dimension, that was the only thing in my life that I always did really just by myself without having a buddy or a friend with who I did it. But everything else, pretty much my whole science career, my studies, I always had some partner or friend who was also doing similar stuff and somebody to discuss with. And then it's very easy, because if you have such a person who is also interested, you can try out things, you can discuss your findings, and that kind of draws you into it. So I think those two things, try and read a little bit or watch videos on that stuff, listen to podcasts. There are tons of interesting ones out there. And also connect with other people, like-minded people, and try to get it done with them together. So this is how I would approach it.
Thank you so much, Andreas, for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was really, really great. I enjoyed it.
I'm really very happy to talk to you. It was great having you for our podcast. I mean, yeah, we really learned a lot of it. And it's so beautiful to know that a person can move from science, from aviation, interest in aviation, to military, to defense, to army, to moving into academia, full-fledged academia, and now a mix between academia and industry, mentorship, training. So yeah, that kind of sums up everything. And I'm so happy, and I wish you all the best for everything you do in your life, for your personal and professional. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The same to you.
Hope you loved the episode. Subscribe to our show and see you next Saturday.